Hello, my name is James Inverne. I'm the author of the play A Walk with Mr Heifetz. Now, this is a special event, at least as far as I'm concerned. Certainly these days, when we're sitting here in social distancing because of the novel coronavirus, so it's nice to be able to get out via, if only via Zoom, rather than physically outside the four walls. What you're about to see is a roundtable discussion which is intended to support the socially distanced recording that has been made of the play. And for this occasion, we were very fortunate and privileged to have the company of Yael Medini. Yael Medini is the daughter of Moshe Sharett, the second Prime Minister of Israel, first Foreign Minister of Israel, very distinguished, one of the most distinguished amongst Israel's founding fathers. Funny to speak of a founding father as her father, and as you'll find out during the discussion, she is one of only two surviving people to have been in the room during the ceremony of the signing of Israel's Declaration of Independence. You can actually see her, a little bit of her, in the famous photograph. Her uncle was Yehuda Sharett. Those two are two of the three main characters in the play. So we also brought in Yuval Boim, who has played Yehuda in every production, including the world premiere production off-Broadway, primary stages, also in London. And Mariella Haubs, who was our onstage violinist. Mariella, incidentally, is or has been a student of Yitzhak Perlman, and Yitzhak Perlman was not only a student of Yuval Heifetz, he was brought to America by Yael's father, Moshe Sharett, so it's a very small world. Anyway, that sets the scene for what you're about to see. This and the recording the play itself have been created to help support two wonderful charities that we will hope you consider supporting. The AICF, which helps young Israeli artists just at the time they most need it, and Meir Panim, which helps people in dire need of hot, nutritious food, with an emphasis on the very young and Holocaust survivors. So in a moment, you will see the four of us, and I hope you enjoy the discussion. So great, we are recording. Well, lovely to have everyone here. I'm going to introduce everyone to everyone because actually we all know each other apart from Yael, and Yael and I know each other. So I will start with you as the most distinguished member of our group. So Yael Medini, who is the daughter of Moshe Sharett and the niece of Yehuda Sharett, two of the three characters about whom the play we've been doing, A Walk with Mr Heifetz by me, are about. Yael lives in Israel, and Yael is actually mentioned at the end of the play, briefly. And then we have, going clockwise on my computer at least, Yuval Boim, who has played Yael's uncle. It's very strange to say that, since we started working on this play 4 or 5 years ago, 4 years maybe, and did it in our the world premiere production off Broadway with primary stages, and also did it in London at the festival showing we did there. And Mariella Haubs, a wonderful violinist who was also in the off-Broadway production. And the interesting connection, this play is full of connections, but the interesting connection here is that Mariella's teacher was Yitzhak Perlman, who she still, I think, works with regularly. And I recently found out, maybe you told me, Mariella, I can't remember, but the person, not only did Perlman study with Heifetz, there's a masterclass with him, but the person who brought Yitzhak Perlman to America was Yael's father, Moshe Sharett.
I believe so, yes, he told me that.
In fact, and I know that's true because I was speaking this morning to the lady who runs the Israel America Cultural Foundation, the IACF, and they have the Sharett funds, the Sharett grants, and he was one of the early recipients of the Sharett grants. So it's all connected.
Small world.
So it's so lovely to have you all here. We're all socially distanced because of the raging coronavirus. maybe raging a little bit less at the moment, we hope, starting to be on the wane. But I am in Modi'in in Israel. Actually, why don't you all say where you are so I don't get it wrong? Yael, where are you?
I'm in the city of Ramat Gan, which is east of Tel Aviv. I'm in a neighborhood of this municipality called Ramat Chen. Here I am.
Very nice. Yuval?
I am in New Jersey. I am in Hopewell, New Jersey, which is just outside of Princeton. And yeah, we're here for the duration until we can go back to the city.
Mariella?
I'm in Westchester County in New York State, very close to the city. So, yeah.
Very nice. And the other people who aren't with us who are involved in this recording are Richard Topol, who I guess is in Manhattan, Ed Stoppard, who is in London, and our audio technician, Tim Burton, who is in Wales. So it's a very international affair. So the obvious person we'd start with is you, Yael. And in fact, this whole play in many ways almost started with you. The first time I heard the story, as you know, was from my friend Avi Avital, the Israeli mandolin player. But he got the story wrong. He told me it was Yehudi Menuhin who Yehuda met. Anyway, I sent an email to your brother Yaakov, and if you remember, it seems such a long time ago now, but I came to your father's old office and I met your family, and we had a lovely conversation about your uncle and your father.
My brother's office, not my father's office.
Ah, your brother's office.
Yeah,
is it not?
I remember.
I thought the office used to be your father's office and your brother had taken over.
Not at all, not at all.
Ah, okay. Well, that's one illusion shattered. And you were particularly close to your uncle, Yael, weren't you? Because you had a shared love of music. Is that right? Perhaps you can talk about it.
No, it's not only that. I'm musical, but I'm not on this level at all. But as it happens, Yehuda was lucky in many. He was an unlucky person in many ways, but he was lucky in the way he had very deep relationship with 3 of his nieces and a nephew. I was one of the nieces. He shared with us. He was a person who shared his troubles and tribulations. And as it happens, he lived in our house for 2 years when he went to the Academy of Music. He started learning music really, the first time he did it was when he was already 45 years old. Before that, he never went to a conservatory or an academy. He played the violin and he knew, and he already composed. And at that time, only he lived with us in Jerusalem. He went to the academy in Jerusalem. And he was very close. I was then 15, 16, 17. And he shared with me all his experiences, while learning, all the principles of harmony and theory and all that. And he was all the time composing. So this drew us very, very close. And then also he would try me on, let me sing this, and this should use this interval or this interval, this scale or that scale, etc. Also, he, as time went on, he also did some editorial work. I want to go into it, but with this also, he used to consult with us many, many times. I once spent with him from 8 in the evening till 8 in the morning. 12 hours we sat together on one of his editing labors. Anyhow, we were in that sense, we were very close.
Wow.
Also, once we had I played the piano at one point. I'm not a good piano, but there was a period of my life which I was not so bad, and we had a concert. We played together the Bach concerto in E minor, and I did the piano, and then Tartini and Vivaldi. We did it together in this kibbutz, and that was also to us very close. I wrote about 5, 6 pieces about him, and different aspects of his life.
And
Oh,
and,
that's it.
and the concert was presumably in Kibbutz Yagor, because
That's right. Yes.
from the time when he lived with you.
Yes.
James, I'm smiling because as Yael, as you're talking and you're saying, I play piano, but I'm not a real piano. You know, there's a line in the play where where Yehuda actually says that about him, about his violin. Yes, yeah, about his, not about you, about his own violin playing. You know,
but there's no parallel between us. There's no question about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I should hasten to add that the Yehuda and indeed the Moshe in my play are, I would say, at least half fictional. To someone who knew them as well as you did, Yael, they'll probably seem almost completely fictional, but we tried to get it somewhat close. Actually, I can't remember if I told you, Yuval and I once went on a little expedition when Yuval was back in Israel a couple of years ago, and we went to try and find the quarry. Did I tell you about this story?
No, I don't remember. I don't think so.
It was, well, Yuval, why didn't you tell the story? Because I've been talking a lot.
it was great. So we drove up to the kibbutz and
En Harod.
to En Harod, and you know, we just wanted to come take a look at En Harod and thought maybe they had any information about that event.
I should say, sorry, just because some of the people who watch this won't know what the event is, although hopefully they will now all go and listen to the play. But Yehuda Sharett went to attended a concert the Moshe Heifetz gave in pre-Israel Palestine in the 1920s, which was in a stone quarry, and we didn't know, and I couldn't find anyone who knew exactly where the concert took place. So Yuval and I, on this day, went to try and find where it was. And we knew it was by En Harod. But En Harod, sorry, you carry on with the story now.
Well, as much as I remember, you know, we came in and we started asking around, and then I forget her name, but she came out with a wonderful book. And she, first of all, said, look, here's a photo of that concert in the quarry, and we later used that photo. Did we use it as art, as part of the art for the production?
Yeah, we might have done.
Yeah. Anyway, so she said, oh, it's over there. If you just go beyond, first we walked up a hill and we were able to see it from across, she described it, we were able to see it from across the valley. And then we got in the car and my dad drove us around, and we got in the car and we found it, but we were kind of like bumbling around, and these two gentlemen came out and kind of were wondering what we were doing there. And James, of course, immediately started singing to check out the acoustics.
That's true.
But it was wonderful. It was a quarry, that it was a stone quarry, and you know, it was sort of cut into a hat shell, and you can imagine where people would have sat and kind of huddled together and watched the concert, and it looked similar to, they had continued mining after that photo that we saw, so it looked much bigger and open. But then these two gentlemen came out and they had a whole history about the quarry itself, and then they insisted that we stay and have Turkish coffee with them.
No, but it was literally a history. They were the two sort of watchmen of the quarry, and one of them had literally written a little book which was a history of the quarry and En Harod, and he insisted on showing it to us over tea or coffee or something.
Do you remember his name?
No, but I probably got it somewhere. And the lady at the kibbutz at En Harod knew you. She was an older lady who'd been there for many, many years, and she had known Yehuda. And she talked about when the train used to come through. There was only a train once a week, I think.
Well, okay. I think it's once a day.
Oh, once a day, and it brought. Didn't she talk about it brought toys or musical instruments for the children or something?
Well, that was something that Yehuda had arranged for toys and musical instruments to be brought to the kibbutz, and I forget exactly how.
That was when Yehuda was in Berlin. He was
That's
he was a shaliach, 1930-31. When he came back, he brought a collection of musical instruments, not toys.
Instruments.
Yes. Tell me, do you remember, James? Do you remember the lady's name in Harod? Because Harod is I know the place very well. I have a very good friend there. Do you remember her name?
I don't, but I have it on my email somewhere.
Okay, we'll get to it. Yeah.
She was working in the museum.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So one thing which really struck me, which Yael and Mariella, I'll bring you in a second. So apologies for that, but which really struck me was I had no idea. Well, first of all, the kibbutz had moved. The reason we couldn't find the quarry was because En Harod had moved across the valley, and then there was an enormous argument, and they split into two. So there's an En Harod Aleph, En Harod A, which is I think the one higher up. And then
you're mixing things up, but let's get to the history out of the way.
I'm sure I am. But that's right, though. They split. One went a bit higher, one went a bit lower, but that was later, right?
Yeah.
But the thing which really struck me was what we think of as what my generation thinks of as a kibbutz now is very, very different to what En Harod was in those days. And they showed us some photographs that En Harod then was really just tents. And they created it for if I remember this correctly, they created it for the returning members of the Jewish Legion who'd come back from the war, and they had no job and they had nowhere to live. And so they tried to solve both of those things by creating this kibbutz that the ex-members of the Jewish Legion could build roads, is that right? And live in the tents.
Never heard of that. You're mixing up so many historical facts. It's a mishmash. I'm sorry to say that.
No,
I think I can clarify. I think, James, that's the story of the quarry. The way the quarry was created, the reason the quarry was put together was as it gave work.
To give them a place for work. Maybe.
And it was somehow it was in conjunction with the Jewish Legion.
But was that not the kibbutz to begin with? Was that not the origins of the kibbutz?
No, the origin of the kibbutz is in Kinneret. The Ganya in Kinneret. These are the origin of the kibbutz. And Harod started because people who were in Kinneret wanted in those days, they wanted the kibbutz to be very small and intimate. And some people in that group said, no, the kibbutz should be big and large and, many people. And they moved out I won't mention the names, it won't mean anything to you. And they moved out of Kinneret to the Jezreel Valley and established this En Harod kibbutz, which was down next to the fountain of En Harod. Ein is fountain. It's mentioned in the Bible, in the book of Judges, if you care to.
This is the Gideon. This is where
this is the story of Gideon, exactly. And then, so the tents, all the tents were now next to the fountain. And then they moved up the hill, opposite, because it was much better to be on a higher level. The air was better and no mosquitoes, etc., etc. But that's the history of En Harod, which is something. a subject all by its own. Yeah.
Something that she mentioned, the lady at the museum, if we find her name, she mentioned that we were wondering during that concert, how did they get the piano up there?
Yeah.
And they hauled it up on a cart, and donkey or however, apparently.
There was no problem. When my family came from Russia in 1906, they had a piano. They moved it all the way from Odessa to an Arab village north of Tel Aviv. They found a way on a camel. I think they could. A camel, I think,
Wow.
took it from Jaffa to that village in north of Jerusalem.
So Yael, so music was felt to be a vitally important thing in your family, and also in the wider Yeshuv, the Jewish area in Palestine.
It was always music, yes. Even the first Aliyah when they came 1881, the first what they consider the first immigration, they already brought pianos with them, and the girls and ladies played, and they had an orchestra in those days even. Yeah, it was part of Jewish life, Jewish intelligentsia culture, I would say, not in the shtetl so much, although in the shtetl they had the chazanim in the synagogue, but more in the urban, it was part of the culture. To play, yeah.
And Mariella, in the play, you played the violinist. It was slightly typecasting for you, but the role of the violinist is she's always there, although she's kind of in Yehuda's head. She sort of represents his artistic soul. But you're playing these very kind of Jewish feeling melodies. And asking you as someone who you're actually the odd one out here. You're the non-Jewish minority for once. Did those particular kind of melodies, those very melismatic melodies, did there seem to be something? I don't want to give you a leading question, but something of a culture there, or something particularly spiritual? And playing them night after night for 6 weeks or however long it was. How did you somehow feel differently about that kind of music at the end, or closer to it, or something?
Absolutely. I mean, most of the music that we play as classical, musicians and classical violinists is music that's composed a long time ago, and then we try to perfect the craft of bringing out exactly what the composer intended to hear, and combining that with the musician's each individual voice. And what was so unique about this is that my role basically was not the finished product. My role was his, as you said, artistic soul, the process. It was more about the process. So that was a very interesting experience, because I felt much more included in what goes through musicians and a composer's persona while they are bringing out their voice, and the voice of their culture, and the voice of their history. But also I kind of felt like I had a development in getting closer to that. So throughout the process, I listened to a lot of klezmer, a lot of niguns, and I remember you were also sending me a lot of really great music, and just kind of getting to know that more, and trying to step into what Yehuda might have felt like combining, for him, most of his development, like his voice was so strong, but it wasn't till later in life that he, translated that with musical knowledge. A lot of the time it's all musical knowledge, and then musicians try to, get their own voice later. But what was so unique about Yehuda was that he had the voice first, and what he wanted to say, and what he was passionate about, and what he cared about, and the kibbutz and his culture, and then he developed the musical
technique.
Yeah, to translate that. So it was kind of it was throwing like the process that I was used to, and that most classical musicians are used to, upside down, and that was just so interesting and very real in that way.
It's an interesting week to talk about this, because here in Israel we've just had Yom HaZikaron, which is the day of remembrance for fallen soldiers and for people who've been killed in terrorist attacks. This year, I think we also felt it was a lot for the people who fall into this horrible disease, and also the healthcare workers who are putting their lives on the line. But it's really fascinating, because it's the day before Yom Ha'atzmaut, which is Israel's Independence Day, which is one of the happiest days of the year. And in a split second, you go from the depths of grieving to the heights of usually street parties, not out in the streets this year, but and Yael, do you feel that music is a big part? I always feel this, that the music is a big part of that. You go from, on every television channel, you have a certain kind of music during Yom HaZikaron, and then it's sort of in a split second, you've got a very different kind of music, and yet they're sort of related, and they somehow seem to be the spirit of this country. Do you
Yeah, look, music has a tremendous effect on people. You know, from deep sorrow to tremendous jubilation. Music, you know, is overwhelming, and it's so prevalent in Israel. You know, being a musical country, I feel. You are right.
But it's also, I think, Israeli music in particular, and even if we think of your uncle's music, his most famous song "Veolai," which, if you listen to all you dear viewers listen to the recording, you'll hear. I had this idea the other day to do right at the end, after all the credits and the thank yous and everything, right at the end. I put together a little montage. I haven't told you this, Mariella, yet, by the way, or Yuval, but I put together a little montage of some of the most famous Israeli singers, many of whom sang this song. And what's fascinating is that some of them, like Esther Ofarim, for example, sing it in a very mournful way. And then others, there's this Mizrahi, this Eastern style singer whose name's gone out of my head, sing it in a very, very cheerful, jubilant way. And I find it so fascinating that this kind of, you can almost use the same piece of music. You could use it for Yom HaZikaron, or you could use it for Yom HaTzmaut.
That's very, very enticing, but I couldn't think of Veolai as a happy song.
I'll send you a couple of the ones we found. But actually, Yuval did a bit of research on it, on the original Rachel poem, and I'm sure you know this, and you found that it has very sad origins.
The poem itself?
Yeah,
or
with
the
what was
song?
happening to Rachel at the time, the poem.
Yeah, if I remember, I mean, it's been a couple of years since I've done a lot of this research, so I might be also
put you on the spot.
conflating some things together. But are you speaking about Ve'ulai or Rachel?
Yeah. No, Ve'olai. Aren't I right in saying it's when Yael was she not? She had to leave her kibbutz or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, she was once it was clear that she was ill, they asked her to leave, and it was a huge. It made a huge impact on her, and it alienated her from a lot of people. And she spent a big chunk of her life in a one-room apartment in Tel Aviv, in bed, and every once in a while she'd have the few friends coming over and taking care of her or keeping her company. And that time was an incredibly artistically fertile. It was a fertile time for her, and all these poems came pouring out of her pain, really. And Ve'ulai was another one of those where it's as if that her time in the kibbutz never happened. You know, she was able to go into the feeling of those days on the, you know, by the Kinneret, on the seeing the mountains, the quality of the light, and it was as if it didn't happen, even though it was so clear in her imagination, and that's so beautifully articulated. I mean, that's her thing. And there was a line at the play at some point, and I don't remember if it's still in there, but where he says her words weren't just, when Yehuda describes Rachel's poetry, that they weren't just poems, they were these incredibly concise and rich tapestries of experience, as all incredible poems are. And that poem in particular, and another poem that I also fell in love with while I was researching her and her poetry was, oh man, the name escapes me. There's actually a video of Yehuda teaching.
Ah, yes. Aulel Kagefen.
Yeah, yeah. And the poetry in that is just incredible. I mean, she goes right into the core of experience, and the music that Yehuda put to it, they're just kind of like, it's as if they were a match made in heaven.
Right. Yeah, they were.
Yeah, let me ask you about your father. I'm particularly interested in the later period when Israel was created, and he was Moshe, when he was so instrumental. He was the first foreign minister and second prime minister. So around the period of 1948, how important?
Excuse me, somebody's ringing the bell. I'm coming. I just have to open the door for somebody.
Okay, you go. We'll talk about other things.
I actually wanted to say, while Yael is gone, part of Mariella, what you're saying about you finding process and finding your own voice within Yehuda's voice was such an incredible process, also in terms of just finding the fictional our Yehuda's voice, and that came through the process of rehearsal and listening to his songs and experimenting. And so much of the work that you and I had to do together was to come up with, we broke down little shards of nigunim and little shards of for instance, a Chel song, and wove those together into what we imagined was Yehuda's, the music that Yehuda hears in his head, which he references in the play so often. We had to come up dramaturgically. It was a fun exercise to come up with our version of what is it that Yehuda hears in his head, and then the audience actually gets to hear that, which was, for me as an actor, was such an interesting process to be working with a musician, and based on all this research we were doing, to give life to something new, based on Yehuda's voice that only he heard in his head, right? So that was a very interesting process.
Yeah, and I feel like that's what's so also special about Yehuda, because I feel like that's like the epitome of what an artist is and should be. And all great artists, like, I feel like there's always a difference between like a great instrumentalist, for example, and a great artist. And a great artist always serves some kind of, higher purpose, whether that's spiritual or religious, or whether it's for the community, or whether it's just, the sound that they hear in their head and they're trying to recreate that. But Yehuda, that's why I feel like every artist can learn from somebody like him, because he had this very, very clear vision in his heart and in his mind and in his ears, and kind of held on to that. And that's what eventually got him to expressing that in songs like that. And, so many artists lose that higher purpose, where they don't lose themselves, because obviously it's not, their identity is in that, but, where it's more than just, the end result of perfectionism. And I felt like the play brought that out so beautifully, and also our process hopefully mimicked that in a way of his process.
Yeah. That's beautifully expressed. So talking about music as a vision, Yael, now that your coronavirus isolation delivery has arrived, that happened the other day. Talking about the period of when the state was created around 1948 and beyond, how central a role did your father feel, or important a role did your father feel that music should have? And part B of that question is, at that point, how close were he and Yehuda in terms of, did they talk about that? Was it something that your father would talk to Yehuda about, the role of music in the country? Or so there's two questions there.
I don't think they talked about it. They were close in many ways and not close in many ways. They were totally different people. They were both intelligent, both dedicated to the Zionist cause. My father was also very musical. His mother may have wanted him to play the violin, of course, as a Jewish boy, but it didn't work out, so he took up the oboe. He had a beautiful tenor voice, and he could, his solfege was excellent. But he was, as in many aspects of life, he didn't develop, I would say. Like for literature, I don't think he could understand Kafka, for example. He understood Joyce. I remember he told me to read James Joyce, but not Kafka. And in music, he could his first songs like Ve'ulai, Aulel Kagef, and all those things. But once Yehuda wanted to branch out and started to compose different kind of music, my father could not understand it. He couldn't sympathize with Yehuda's desire to break out of his limitations. I don't know whether I'm expressing.
Yeah. No, it's very interesting. But your father still felt that
Yeah.
This is how he. But as far as music being part of culture, he was, of course, he thought it was, basic, for any culture to have, strong musical, academies, teachers of music. All that was very important for him. Symphonies or orchestras, concerts, etc.
What do you remember was your uncle's reaction after the actual Declaration of Independence? Since you and your father were in the room when the declaration was signed, which I still find amazing. Yael's one of the.
The only two people who are still alive who were present at that at the event. No, I didn't see Yehuda at that time at all, because that was 14. That was in May. I right away I went to. I became a soldier. I didn't see him for, I think, a year after that. I was in military service, and he was in Yagur. Actually, at one point he came to our camp, and he gave us he prepared a pageant. I don't know how you say it in Masechet. I don't know how you say it in English.
A pageant?
Yeah. Masechet, how do you say it?
It's like it's a performance of sorts. Yeah.
Of words and music. You see, in the 30s, from 1936 to 1939, there were disturbances in Israel. There were many Arab attacks, and which was called the disturbances. And Yehuda at that time created a pageant about this very dangerous times. It took all kinds of biblical phrases to describe the times, and it was a pageant. It was something. It's built on singing and recitation and singing, solo singing, choir singing, solo recitation, and group. It's a very moving piece.
A little bit kind of like what his seders, his seder.
Yes, exactly. It was like an oratoria. This what I would say. That's more. So so he came to our camp, and he did it. He made us. He developed a choir and soloists, etc. It was a marvelous thing. Yeah.
I'm sure, being him, he didn't make any allowances for people being out at the camp, and he had a very strict rehearsal schedule and made sure everyone did their best.
He was a dictator. If somebody looked at his watch, he would take this watch away from him. He was very, very strict. Yeah.
So I have one last question for you, Yael. I'm sorry, you're getting the brunt of the Inquisition, but from what I know and from what you've told me and from what I've read about your father's philosophy, certainly your father's philosophy, I think, and probably your uncle's as well, as they came to the end of their lives, did they feel that music was something, and art was something that had an important role in bringing people together and different peoples together as well?
Well, I don't think they put it into words. I don't think they conceptualized, but both of them loved communal singing, and they felt that it was something that cemented people together. And that's the natural thing, all communities all over the world sit down and sing together. It's makes for people, to make a communal feeling, But they didn't put it into words. My father, you loved to sing and to conduct and to be part of the communal singing.
So let me give the last word to Mariella as the musician among us. You're like the rest of us, socially distanced. How important have you felt as a musician who spends her life intensely in music? What role has music assumed for you over these last weeks, and what role do you feel that music and art should have for all of us at the moment?
Well, I think it's fascinating. It's easy for people to think that, oh, like music and art is like, something that if all of your other problems are solved, you have. It's an easy way to think about art that way. But if you look at history, and if you look at any moment in human history where there has been struggle, people have always gone to music. And you can even see that, I'm sure most people have seen this at this point, in Italy, people, playing music and singing across balconies, and, people actually play more music when they're suffering. And I've noticed that that's happening in the coronavirus too. People, obviously people can't play in person, but if you look at how many people and musicians and artists are, bringing art, to bring people together, it always works. And I've seen this, at refugee camps too. You walk into a refugee camp and people are just playing music. People play music, and especially when people are suffering, people play music. And so I think that it's not just, a privilege, when there's no other problems, but it's a way to help societies and people get through difficult things. And that's what it has served during this pandemic, and I think it'll serve that forever. I mean, that's what music is at the root all about.
Or listen to plays. Okay, well, lastly, just before we call it quits, and since we have this wonderful opportunity to have Yael here, and Marielle and Yuval, you haven't met her before. Have either of you got a question for Yael? Don't feel any pressure, but do you have any question for her about Moshe or Yehuda or the time?
Oh, I have a question. How was his coffee?
His coffee?
Oh, I have to explain this in the play, because it's been a long time since you've heard it. There's a running joke in the second act about that he made terrible coffee.
I don't remember him ever cooking anything in general and coffee in particular. I don't know. He didn't have a kitchen at this time in his room on the kibbutz. No, he loved to eat. He loved to drink. He loved, but he never cooked or anything. Yeah. So I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
I do have a question, actually. I'm curious if you observed a change in Yehuda in regards to his approach to music before and after he went to school and to the academy to study it. Was there a change in his overall approach or his attitude towards music and art?
Certainly there was. He could not compose the same kind of lyrics that beforehand. He found it wasn't enough for him. He wanted to develop more, like he would take a tune that he had once composed, like even the Ulai or Aulel, he didn't do it, and he would weave into it other voices, other melodies, because he was exasperated with himself that he was like limited. He wanted to spread more. And if you listen to his music, like in the Seder, for example, you can see how he took his old melodies and tried to develop more parts to it, another soprano, another bass, another alto, to weave through, to make it richer. But he was never, I feel, never completely satisfied. That was part of his, in general, part of his personality. He was never satisfied with what he did. It was very difficult.
Like a true artist.
Yeah, as well as I think that's typical of an artist.
For example, my father used to write something, first draft was the last draft, like Mozart. Almost nothing to Yehuda had had for each sentence in prose too, seven different variations. It was hard for him to decide on the one and only to the end.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, Yael, in that case, as I remember you telling me once, you helped your father with the wording of the Declaration of Independence.
No.
No, I mean, but you wrote it down for him, didn't you?
He dictated it to me.
That's what I meant. So you're probably lucky it was your father who did that bit and not your uncle. Otherwise, you would have been out for a lot
He
longer.
could never have that. There would be no state. There would be no declaration if it depended on Yehuda.
Wonderful. Well, let's leave it on that note, and I hope that people enjoy this recording. Thank you all for your participation. It's been a real pleasure and an honor. And I'll just say to people that we're giving this recording for free, but we're asking if people are able to donate something to one of our two nominated charities, the AICF and also Meir Panim, which the AICF helps artists in Israel, and Meir Panim helps people who desperately need food, with particular focus on young people and Holocaust survivors. And these are two charities I hope and felt that Yehuda and Moshe would approve of.
I'll gladly donate. But maybe you can write to me the addresses of those places.
Oh, well, I didn't mean you had to donate, but okay. That's very nice. I'll send it to you. So thank you all, and I hope we have continued health and happier times, and we can all actually be in the same room at some point.
Thank you. I hope I've been of help.
Yeah, it was so מאוד נעים לפגוש אותך. You know, it's funny when some of family members came to see the play. It was such a bizarre experience to me because I felt like that we were related, even though we don't know each other. But I was so immersed in the world and in Yehuda's life that when I met them, I felt like they were kin. So it's so nice to be able to speak with you.
Thank you. It was really lovely. Yeah.
Bye all, and speak to you all soon.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Good.